Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Roxanne. If it's your first time here, then welcome. Today I want to do a little discussion surrounding the book and the person Jim Jones, and the book The Road to Jonestown, Jim Jones and the People's Temple by Jeff Ginn. I just finished this one yesterday, and I realized I had a lot to say, and so I thought I would just kind of talk about this one instead of including it in a wrap-up. I just kind of wanted to talk about this one and give it the attention that I wanted to give it. So I have some notes written down as always. This I guess will include spoilers. I don't know if you can consider them spoilers. These are all very popular facts that they've made dozens of documentaries on. But I mean, I don't know if they can be considered spoilers when this story happened back in 1978. So this book is exactly what the title suggests. It tells you about the life of Jim Jones, who he was as a kid, and then as an adult, and then as a leader of the People's Temple, and then the leader of Jonestown. It tells you how he got there, how his family was, how he was with people, his ideals, and things like that. And essentially, the main question that I felt the author was sort of trying to grapple with, and that a lot of his surviving followers have tried to grapple with, was he always a bad person, or did he get that way through hubris, drug use, and misguided ideals, essentially. I feel that at the end of this book, maybe he's given a little bit more credit than I would have given him, and so I just wanted to talk a little bit about that. So Jim Jones was born in Indiana to a woman who never felt she was given the attention that she deserved, who never felt that she achieved what she felt she deserved to achieve in the world, and to the son of a farmer who was an injured veteran and essentially wasn't able to do much with his life after he was injured. He didn't really have any passions, and so he was born into a very small town, and his mom was always working and was never really paying much attention to him. His dad was always out of the house, also never paying much attention to him, and so he began to get the attention of the other mothers in the community. One of them in particular who started to take him to the Nazarene church. And she became very involved, and she loved that. She felt that she had brought him to God, and that he had accepted God, and she had essentially, brought another soul to God, and had done her work as a Christian woman, and she was very, very happy, and he seemed to be very happy in the church. But as time went on, he started to become curious about the other churches, and he would go from one church to the other every single week, which was very strange in this town because everybody very much stuck to who they were and what religion they were part of, and didn't veer. They didn't really weren't interested in what any of the other churches were preaching. But sometimes he would start off in one church and halfway through would go to another one because he wanted to catch the end of that one as well. And he was always in church, and he became sort of a collector of knowledge of this evangelical way of life, of all of these different denominations of Christianity, and he became obsessed with it through the way that his mother was always saying that, always kind of, oh, woe is me, I don't have the money that I should have, the rich people don't take care of the poor, and they don't, they take all of the money for themselves. And she was sort of his introduction into the inequalities of the world, but it was an introduction that was misguided from the beginning. He began to realize that Black people were treated differently, and a lot of the reasons why a lot of his followers think that he was at least at some point a good person was because he fought vehemently for the rights of Black people. he would, once he started to get older and get more involved in church and sort of wanting to be a pastor, a reverend himself, he would use his influence in the community to go to establishments and essentially try to pressure owners to integrate. And he started to try and become essentially the leader that he felt a lot of the poor Black communities around him needed. And so essentially he was able to get a very large Black following because he had this knack of knowing exactly what each person needs in life. And he felt that what they needed was someone to look after them. And so he realized that whether he actively noticed that he had privilege because he was a white male or not, he used the influence that he had to help them. He would write letters to get their water fixed or their electricity fixed. He would, like I said, integrate some of the local restaurants and stores, and he would allow them to get jobs because once they integrated with their clientele, he would then pressure them to hire people of color. And so there is no denying that through his adult life and through his church, a lot was done. And so that's where a lot of the conflict is, because a lot of his followers say, well, there's no denying everything that we did. The People's Temple would adopt kids, they would feed the poor, they would help the needy, they would have nursery homes, they would take in the elderly. Him and his wife adopted many kids in need. And so there are a lot of things that are positive, but they were all, in my opinion, tinged with very disturbing desires on his part. Essentially, what I think drove him the most was hubris and just his need, very much like his mother, to get attention and to be significant and to be important. And I think what happened was he realized that he could provide that to a lot of people. He could be sort of that beacon to a large portion of the Black communities around him, and he fed off of that. He was the type of person that as soon as he helped someone, he felt that they owed him for life and that he owned them. And that began to take over him and his works as time goes on. After he was in Indiana, he moved to California, and he wanted to take over other people's congregations. He loved the way Black pastors would lead their congregation, how lively they were, and there were pastors whose congregation he wanted to steal because he just wanted more people to be a part of his own congregation. He would force his followers to give up the titles of their homes, of their cars, to give up half, if not all, of their income to the church, and then he wanted complete control of all of the money that was coming in to the church. So very clearly you start to see that there is always an underlining desire for him to propel himself forward. And though like I said, there is no denying a lot of the positive things that the People's Temple did, and that I genuinely believe that people who were involved with him, though naive, were just people wanting to do good, who wanted to provide social justice and to right wrongs. I don't think he himself was a good person. I think everything that he did had an agenda, and I think that ultimately the book, in my opinion, gives him a little bit more credit than he deserves. I essentially don't think he was a good person, because he wanted to do everything for personal gain. He was never truly logical about the way his actions would affect his followers. So he was a liar. He would just lie nonstop, and that manifested itself in the People's Temple a lot, because he would tell his followers that he was a savior, that he was a healer, that he could revive the dead. And he would put actors essentially throughout his congregation so that they could help him deceive his followers. So his People's Temple eventually became so large, he would have people listening to the conversations had by other members of the congregation. So if someone is over there talking about problems that they're having in their marriage, they would walk by, they would sort of hear what was going on, they would let him know, and then during the congregation he would signal to that person and say, your marriage is going to be saved, or I will pray for your marriage. And so people felt like, oh my gosh, he knows what's going on in my personal life, he can read minds, he's a wonderful person. They needed help, they just wanted someone that they felt had their back and really had their best interest at heart, and he provided himself as the perfect person to be that for them. And so a lot of them trusted him wholeheartedly because they would see that he was trying to help them, that they were doing good in the community, and they had no reason to distrust him. So he would just lie constantly, and he would cheat constantly. He became involved with the congregation. The Disciples of Christ was the religion that he decided to align himself with in order to get tax exemption. Just in order to get tax exemption, he didn't actually even believe in God, which is just like, it's tough to read things like this and wonder why people didn't realize what type of person he really was. But I mean, really, this guy was just a master deceiver. So yeah, he would lie to the Disciples of Christ, saying that his congregation was much smaller than it was, so that he had to send a lot less money than was due to the size of his congregation. So depending on the size, you had to donate part of the earnings of the church to the Disciples of Christ as an institution, I guess. And he would lie about that so that he wouldn't have to give up his money, because he was incredibly possessive of everything about him. It was his family, his children, his church, his money. Everything was his. He didn't want to share any of it. He would hate that any of his followers would spend any time doing anything other than being at church. They couldn't go to the movies, they couldn't drink, they couldn't have sex. But then he changed and he became obsessed with sex and wanted everybody to talk about sex. And he would manipulate the women of the church who saw him as this hero, as this savior, into having sex with him. And he raped at least 2 girls. None of the people that he had sex with, ironically enough, were black women, even though he loved black women, but of course not enough to have sex with them, except one who he raped because he drugged her. So he was not a good person, in my opinion. He really wasn't. And I think you start to analyze everything that he did, and I don't know how people would even entertain it, honestly. So after many years of having his congregation in Indiana and then in California, he decided to say that he wanted that there was a holy land where people would go and they would live a magical life together. They would be self-sufficient. They wouldn't have to live by the capitalist rules of the United States and of the world, and they would be free, and they would be an example of what you could be when you were complete socialists and really looking out for each other and a community. And so he decided to go to Guyana, and Guyana's government was okay with it because the place he chose to be in was along the border of Venezuela. So Guyana's government thought that it would be a good buffer between Venezuela and the rest of Guyana, so that because Venezuela was apparently always kind of trying to invade. So they were like, yeah, cool, you're gonna invest all this money in this town, and you're gonna develop it, and you're gonna bring all these Americans, by all means do what you do. So because a lot of individuals sort of started to guess what his intentions were and started to guess that he wasn't the best type of person and that he was cheating, he started to get investigated. He was caught masturbating in front of a cop, an undercover cop. And so he was afraid that that was going to come out and that he was going to lose his following. And so he very rapidly starts to move all of his congregation to Guyana. And he convinces them that this is a great idea. You got to leave everything behind and go to Guyana with me, to Jonestown. It'll be an amazing place. And it never is the place that he promises. It's not this beautiful paradise. A lot of the ground isn't giving any crops, any food. They're wasting an immense amount of money every single month that they're there. And people back home whose families have left to Guyana, who haven't spoken to their parents or their grandparents, their aunts, their uncles, their siblings, begin to worry, and people begin to reach out to the federal government over and over and over and over and over again. And so they send a congressman over, and congressman dies over there, is killed, and then he thinks, oh shit, you know, we're done for. This is the time that we've all been waiting for. We have to do a mass suicide to serve as martyrs for our cause. And it ends in the death of over 900 people. And I don't think how any part of that sounds like he was a good person. So I enjoyed is weird, but it's, I guess, the best word that I can come up with when I read true crime. It was very informative. It wasn't as personal as I usually like my true crime to be. I enjoy when authors are able to invest themselves, like put themselves a little bit more into the story, kind of share their opinions more. This was very distanced. The author was telling you this fact after this fact after this fact after this fact, and only somewhat in the end made some sort of a conclusion, but even then was very distanced, was very sort of cold and factual. So it wasn't as emotive as I would like, but it was fascinating to read and to learn about this man. And I really just came to the conclusion that he wasn't ever a good man. He was bisexual, and he could not grapple with that. He couldn't accept it, but he would again use his influence to try and get men to have sex with him. And then the way that he would make himself feel better about that was to force every man in his congregation to proclaim that he was homosexual, whether they were or not. And he would shame them and shame them and shame them until they did. There was a pedophile in his church, and instead of turning him over to the police, that was against their views to turn over people to the police. And so they just like almost mutilated the guy, but they didn't turn him over to the police. They just left him stay in the congregation, and the guy kept doing it. So he was completely blinded by his own desire to become someone in the world, that he never really became that beacon that everybody really wanted. And by the time that a lot of them started to realize that he wasn't, it was too late. They had given everything over to the People's Temple and then to Jonestown. When they arrived in Jonestown, everybody's passports were taken away, all of their personal possessions were taken away, so a lot of them couldn't go back. Most of them couldn't go back. And so it's sad. It is incredibly, incredibly sad that over 900 people lost their lives over a cause that a lot of them really, really believed in and really, really thought was going to make the world a better place, and in a man that they really thought wanted to make the world a better place, but who really in actuality just wanted to be somebody, and this was the best way he knew how. Really, it just made me so sad. If you are interested in this story, I do recommend it. Like I said, it's very factual. It's very like 1 point, 2 point, 3 point. So if you're cool with that, then by all means read it, because it's very easy to get into. It's very accessible. So yeah, I recommend it. If this is your thing and you're interested in cults and who follows them, who becomes a member, how they begin. This guy was wicked, in my opinion. So yeah, those are my 2 cents. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Thank you for watching and for listening. I love you guys.